And record is started. All right. First announcement I want to make. We are going to have a very special speaker next April. And where's the one I want to share? Oh, I covered it up. Hang on just a second. So in April, we are going to have Noah Stryker as our guest speaker. Noah was the 2015 Big Year winner. So he basically went around the world and tried to see the most number of species of birds in the entire world that year, and he accomplished that goal. So over 6,000 birds. And his book, Birding Without Borders, tells the story of that quest. So he is going to be here. We're actually going to have the program on the LSU campus at the Coastal Auditorium, where we've had previous programs before. So hopefully we'll have a crowd and can fill up an auditorium, because I think it is going to be really exciting to have him here. So, and I want to tell this funny story because I think it's great. So this spring in April, I was looking at eBird to see what people were seeing and who was birding around Louisiana, what was going on down at Grand Isle, and et cetera, et cetera. And I saw that somebody named Noah Stryker had been birding on Grand Isle. And I said, what, the Noah Stryker? Like Noah Stryker? So I looked at his account, and yes, it was him. And then I noticed on one of his lists in the comments, it said with Terrebonne Bird Club. I said, what? Terrebonne Bird Club? He had hooked up with Noah Stryker on Grand Isle. So they had announced that they were having a field trip on Grand Isle on their Facebook page. And so at the end of the day or the next day, I messaged a couple of them and I said, oh, hobnobbing with the celebrity birders, huh? And they're like, what? I said, y'all were birding with Noah Stryker on Grand Isle? And they said, yes. And I said, you know who Noah Stryker is? He was the Big Year winner in 2015, author, kind of a big deal. And they said, oh, he just introduced himself as Noah from Oregon. So he didn't even tell her who he was. And he birded with them all day. So I just think that's a wonderful story. So we invited him back, and we're very excited to have him. So, all right. Let's see, I'm going to make sure that everybody is muted so we don't have any interruptions. Good. All right. Let me get back to my other, stop sharing that. Get back over here. Start sharing that. And do an introduction for our speaker tonight. So tonight we are honored to have Scott Graham. I saved his bio, and now I got to find it. Hang on.
Well, I can tell you everything you just told me the last.
Everything you just said. What is going on? Oh, it is. There we go. There we go. All right. Scott Graham is a regional biologist for Ducks Unlimited in Lafayette, Louisiana. He earned his undergrad and graduate degrees from Louisiana State University, where he pursued a degree in natural resource ecology and management with a concentration in wetland science. His graduate research focused on the effects of marsh management techniques on marsh vertical accretion rates at Rockefeller State Wildlife Refuge. After finishing his master's degree in 2020, so recent graduate, Scott briefly worked as wetland reserve easement technician for the Natural Resource Conservation Service in Faraday, Louisiana. He then transferred to Denham Springs with NRCS as a coastal restoration planner, where he helped administer NRDA nutrient reduction projects in South Louisiana. Since coming to Ducks Unlimited in December of 2021, he continues to help administer NRDA nutrient reduction projects in South Louisiana, and also works with public and private landowners to implement coastal restoration projects such as marsh terracing, marsh creation, freshwater introduction, and shoreline protection. These projects benefit waterfowl and other wildlife as well as people. So welcome, Scott. And these lights, unfortunately, are either on or off.
Oh,
So I'm going to off. You're still here.
thank you, Jane. Thank you all for having me. It's really good to be here tonight to tell you about Ducks Unlimited. I don't know what y'all's familiarity is with the organization, but a lot of people assume it's a hunting club and a clothing brand, but we're much more than that. And we're actually not even that. So hopefully tonight you'll take away some of what we do and how it contributes to the broader conservation efforts that we all seek to implement. So thank you, and I will get started. Oh, and I did want to say thank you for choosing this event tonight, because I noticed that the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries was having their Wild Night tonight, as well as the Atchafalaya Basin Keeper was at Massey's. So lots going on tonight here in Baton Rouge in the conservation community. And I guess that's a good problem to have. So I'm just going to briefly go over some of our Ducks Unlimited staff that we have here in South Louisiana, a brief history of DU if you're not familiar with it, and then I'll get into some of our projects that we've implemented here in South Louisiana. And I want to leave plenty of time for questions and comments.
Saying that they can't see your presentation. So let me see when I do it here. Picky. It's showing. Sometimes if it's already running, then it'll. I don't know if it's showing an actual presentation or just the slides. Same slideshow. Just make sure.
All right, technology.
Showing that on the presentation.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I was just saying I want to briefly go through this presentation because I want to leave plenty of time for questions and comments and discussion if there are any. So we have a field office in Lafayette, Louisiana, and we've got about 14 staff members associated with that field office. Not all are housed in it. We've probably got 10 people in the office. But we have Cassie Lejeune as our Director of Conservation Programs. He recently was promoted to Mike Carlos's position after he retired in May. And we have Dr. Aaron Pierce as our Director of Conservation Services. He was recently promoted. And then I have myself as a regional biologist. And then we have another regional biologist position that is actually vacant right now that we're looking to hire. We have 3 engineers and 1 engineering technician. Bo Terrio is the unsung hero of our office. He's usually out in the field every day, either on a boat or 4-wheeler, looking at our projects, working with our contractors, making sure that those projects meet specifications and are up to the engineering standards that they need. And then we have Kyle Swallow. He's the director of our rice stewardship program. He has 4 staff members under him. He works predominantly in Southwest and Central Louisiana with rice producers, trying to implement best management practices and whatnot. Because what's good for rice is good for ducks. And I'll go over that a little bit later. And then we actually have a staff member in Houma, Louisiana at the ConocoPhillips office there. This is made possible through a unique partnership with ConocoPhillips, where they have provided over $10 million in seed funding for our projects. And through that, we've completed 20 projects with them. So we like to keep a member there in person and help them out with their needs that they have on their property, because they are the largest private wetland owner in Louisiana. And Leslie will be retiring this December, and that position was actually advertised today online, if you have anyone that might be interested. So what is Ducks Unlimited? Like I said, we're not a hunting club. We're not a clothing brand. We are the world's leader in wetlands and waterfowl conservation. And we do that throughout North America. We work in Canada, Mexico, and the US. We are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, though. So Ducks Unlimited can trace its roots back to 1927, when a group of hunters noticed that upland game birds were declining in population. And so they put together the More Game Birds in America Foundation, which was a 10-year plan to try to restore population and habitat for those birds. But in the course of events, the Dust Bowl happened, and they also realized that waterfowl and wetlands were in decline. And so they did the same thing. They formed Ducks Unlimited in 1937, became incorporated then, and had their first on-the-ground restoration project in Canada in 1938. This group of men were also influential in getting a lot of other conservation initiatives started. They lobbied to have a 1 cent per shotgun shell tax initiated to go towards conservation, and which eventually led to the culmination of the Duck Stamp Act passing, as well as many other acts to follow that, such as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which actually followed before then. But so this is a picture of our first chief biologist, Bertram Cartwright. He is pictured here at the Big Grass Marsh Duck Factory #1. This was in Canada at our first Ducks Unlimited project in 1938, where that used to be the headquarters of Ducks Unlimited Canada. They're currently at Oakhammock Marsh, and they moved there in the 1980s. And I will tell you, I've been to the DU headquarters in Canada, the DU headquarters in Memphis, and some of our field offices in Mexico. And I'd have to say the Ducks Unlimited headquarters in Canada is by far the coolest place to visit. They have birding trails, canoeing, lots of waterfowl heritage, memorabilia, and history. So if you're ever up in Winnipeg, it's probably 30 minutes north of Winnipeg in Manitoba. I would highly recommend to go visit their offices there. So hopefully by now we've established what Ducks Unlimited is not, but let's get into what they are. Ducks Unlimited conserves, restores, and manages wetlands and associated habitats for North America's waterfowl. These habitats also benefit other wildlife and people. And the biggest change in this mission statement that I've seen recently is that last sentence. These habitats also benefit other wildlife and people. More and more today, funding resources such as corporate entities and federal grant and state dollars are wanting us to also extend these benefits of our projects to people. And so we're trying to quantify those benefits such as nutrient reduction, carbon sequestration, nutrient quality. So that's something that we're starting to dabble in that I'll touch on later. So how does Ducks Unlimited work? We're spread out throughout the US, and this is from here on out, this is specifically USA, Ducks Unlimited, not Canada or Mexico. We have 4 regional offices, one in California, one in North Dakota, one in Michigan, and another in Mississippi. And from those 4 regional offices, we have multiple field offices. Here in Louisiana, we have 2 field offices, one in Lafayette and one in Monroe. Our headquarters, like I mentioned, we're in Memphis, Tennessee. If you've ever been and visited Memphis, we are not located at the Bass Pro Pyramid. You do see our emblem at the top, but that is just where our Waterfowl Heritage Museum is located, as well as some other cool things. But we have our own separate campus just outside of the city of Memphis. And then probably our most underrated office is the Governmental Affairs Office in Washington, D.C. They advocate on behalf of all of our constituents to make sure that policy that is in place stays in place, and policy that needs to take place is passed and lobbied for. So I believe we have 4 or so individuals in that office. And it's very important. We can't understate the work they do there for our policy. This is just a little illustration showing the timeline of Ducks Unlimited projects and how they unfolded. As I said, our first project was in 1938 in Winnipeg, or near there at Big Grass Marsh Duck Factory #1. Getting into the 30s, we spread out to other Canadian provinces into the 40s, 50s, into the 60s. And then in the 70s, we had our first Ducks Unlimited Mexico project. Moving into the 70s. And then finally in 1984, we did our first project here in the United States in North Dakota. And that was at the Lake Arena WMA, managed by the North Dakota Game and Fish Commission. And then moving into the 90s, we really had exponential growth. You can see we've just, I believe that's a project in every state in the 90s. 2000s, and then 2016, that's the latest we have for this graphic, but we've done much more since then. And you'll notice the majority of projects are clustered in the prairie pothole region of the United States and Canada, as well as the wintering grounds in the Mississippi alluvial valley, the Gulf Coast, the Central Valley of California, and the East Coast. So to date, Ducks Unlimited has conserved over 15 million acres and counting. Those acres are what we count as benefited, enhanced, or restored. And the way we categorize those are based on the restoration technique that we use, but those are counting all 3 of those acres. We are on track this fiscal year to do 550,000 acres conserved in the US. So what I said, rice is good for ducks. This slide pretty much sums all of that up. If you're not familiar, we do have lots of rice country in Southwest Louisiana, and they're considered working wetlands. They're very similar to freshwater wetlands that you see here in Louisiana. They provide many of the same benefits to waterfowl, wading birds, and other water birds. It's the single most valuable crop to wildlife, given that it provides the amount of energy that waterfowl and other birds need to migrate and winter here in Louisiana. It's estimated that it'd take $3.5 billion to replace existing rice lands with managed wetlands. So the benefits that these working wetlands are doing for us are almost priceless. Winter flooded rice lands typically exceed 1 million acres in the rice producing states. In 2018, the rice crop was about 2.7 million acres, and Arkansas produced most of that. And ducks that winter in Louisiana typically get 40% of their food from rice fields. So when they come here to winter or pass through, it's incredibly important for them as they rely on those rice fields. So this graphic just kind of reiterates our areas that we work in, particularly the wintering grounds and the breeding grounds. You can see it's estimated about 45 million breeding waterfowl use the prairie pothole region and the boreal forest of Canada. From there, they disperse to primary wintering grounds in the Central Valley of California, the Gulf Coast, and the Mississippi alluvial valley. This is band data from birds harvested in Louisiana from 1984 to 2012, showing where they were banded. The majority coming from Saskatchewan and North Dakota, making their way all the way down to Louisiana. This graphic showing again the importance of the wintering grounds we have here in Louisiana. We have the Mississippi we have the Mississippi Delta there in the southeast portion of Louisiana, and southwest Louisiana. We have the Chenier Plain, which extends into northeast Texas, and then the Laguna Madre down into southeast Texas. It's estimated that we can winter about 14 million ducks as well as 1.5 million geese in this area. It's very significant for species of gadwall, green-winged teal, lesser scaup, and northern pintail. The graphic you see on the right just shows the funnel effect, is what we call it, how the wintering grounds are the base of that funnel. They come from the Central Flyway as well as the Mississippi Flyway and converge on the wintering grounds here in Louisiana. Unfortunately, our wintering grounds are imperiled. Many of you are familiar with this map. If you haven't seen it before, it's produced from the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. The areas in red are shown to be what is estimated to be lost in the next 50 years if no coastal restoration action is to take place. We've already lost 1.2 million acres since 1932, and we lose them at an average rate of about about one football field every 100 minutes. And you'll notice the only areas in green are the areas that are land gain, and those are natural areas at the Wax Lake Delta and the Atchafalaya Delta, where these deltas are unrestricted. Another area of wetland loss we see is from hurricanes. This is from Hurricane Ida. This is satellite imagery taken on the western side of Lafourche Parish, just outside of Golden Meadow. You see there, the picture on the left was in 2015 of healthy emergent floatant marsh. And the picture on the right is from a couple days after Hurricane Ida passed through. It scoured all of the floatant marsh, it removed it, dispersed it, sank it, whatnot. And you see now all that open water that is less habitat, less valuable for wildlife, and also exposes the community of Golden Meadow. But thankfully, we have organizations such as Audubon, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy that are working to restore habitat and species here in Louisiana. Before I get into some of our projects, I do want to thank our funding sources. Ducks Unlimited is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, and we don't do anything on our own. We partner with every project we do, we partner. And so this is just a small list of some of our ongoing and major partners. ConocoPhillips, like I mentioned, we've got a 10-year partnership with them right now that is going strong, as well as NAWCA, that's the North American Wetland Conservation Act, I'll touch on next. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, we use lots of their projects as match for our federal grants that we write. When you write a grant, they typically require a one-to-one match. And so CPRA is kind enough to let us use some of their projects as match in our grants. We also work with levee districts like the South Lafourche Levee District and parishes, particularly Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish, are longstanding partners. Some of our routine grant sources that we use are the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, NOAA, NAWCA, and some other smaller grant opportunities. So I mentioned NAWCA, that's the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It's an act to conserve North American wetland ecosystems and waterfowl and other migratory birds and fish and wildlife that depend upon such systems. So like I said, this is one of our main bread and butter sources of funding that we use here in Louisiana. We typically write 2 NAWCA grants a year from our office in Lafayette and are awarded 1 to 2 a year. And we do depend on sources like CPRA for match, as well as other partners to provide cash funding to get the match up to a 1-to-1 ratio. The North American Wetlands Conservation Act is funded from fines and penalties to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So one recent and major example is the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Fines and penalties from that went into NALCA to help fund it for about a decade. Some of the DU restoration strategies that we use here in South Louisiana are listed here. This is all of the strategies that CPRA uses and some, one being earth and terracing. Although CPRA does use earth and terracing, it's not an official restoration technique they have listed in their coastal master plan. But we do freshwater introduction to reduce salinities and remove the stress on freshwater marshes from encroaching salinity. We do earth and terracing, which I'll touch on next, shoreline protection to reduce erosion rates, living shoreline, which is kind of goes hand in hand with shoreline protection. That can be things like oyster reefs that CRCL typically does. We do hydrologic restoration and marsh management, which can include water control structures, levees, and pumps, either in conjunction or separately, as well as land acquisition. That's not something we do often, but when we do land acquisition projects, we typically just act as a pass-through entity where Ducks Unlimited will write an ALCA grant, for example, acquire the land, and then turn the deed over to a state wildlife agency, such as the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, or another nonprofit, such as the Nature Conservancy. Most recently, one of our techniques that we've started getting into is water quality and nutrient reduction, and I will hit on that at the end of the presentation. So an example of earth and terracing is seen here. You see a marsh that's open water, it's shallow, and it was historically lush emergent marsh. This is located in Lafourche Parish, where I showed you the satellite imagery from Hurricane Ida. You can see the hurricane protection levee on the left side of the screen that's exposed. The levees protect us, but the marsh protects the levee, and right now there's no marsh there. So a typical project that DU might do is they'll go in and build these earthen terraces. They're long linear segments of soil placed to about an elevation of 2.5 feet above water level. And what that does is it breaks up the wave action and the wind fetch that is in that large expanse of open water. And what that allows for is more submerged aquatic vegetation to establish in between those terraces, which fish and wildlife love. That provides habitat for invertebrates, which waterfowl love, as well as many other wading and migratory birds. So here's some photos showing some of the benefits of terrace. That's all submerged aquatic vegetation that is habitat for invertebrates and small fish. And waterfowl love to get in there to feed and loaf, and use as molting and wintering grounds. Here's just some more benefits of terraces extending to other birds, as well as fish, wildlife, etc. So now we'll get into some of our projects for our fiscal year 2022, which we just wrapped up in June. This is just a couple of our projects that we have listed. It's not extensive, but these are our major projects that we accomplished. We spent $11 million here in South Louisiana on the following projects. And if you take a look at the project names, you'll see there's a pretty good variety of projects that take place on public land as well as private land. Even though a large portion of our projects are on private land, that's just by nature because the majority of wetlands in the US are owned by private individuals. You'll see a variety of project types. We did water control structures, earthen terraces, levee repairs, and crevasse construction. Our current fiscal year we have going on right now, we're estimated to spend about $15 million this year on the following projects, two of which I'll talk about, which are highlighted in yellow. So the Moreau Foundation Terracing Project, that's going to take place in St. Bernard Parish. We recently just bid this project out a couple weeks ago, so it's going to be moving forward with construction here very soon. It's going to feature 30,500 linear feet of earthen terraces just outside the hurricane protection levee in St. Bernard Parish near Chalmette. This is going to be located on property owned by the Moreau Foundation and Taurus Properties. It'll benefit approximately 200 acres and it'll cost about $1 million. Again, partners on this project, which we could not do without, include NACA, the St. Bernard Parish Government, the Moreau Foundation, NIFWIF, the James N. Cox Foundation, Yamaha Marine, CPRA, Valero, and the National Wildlife Foundation. So you can see here, these are some permit drawings that I just threw up here of the terraces. This was what the terrace field will look like using a classic duck wing shaped terrace. And that's not ironic to Ducks Unlimited. That shape has been shown to provide the most benefits to wildlife, as well as protection to the marsh. Next, we've got the Dularge Marsh Enhancement and Community Resiliency Project. This is going to feature 184,000 feet of earthen terraces in Terrebonne Parish. You can see on the map to the right, this is the community of Dularge near Falgo Canal Marina. It has two tracks to this project. The north track is located on Apache Minerals Corporation and is going to also feature a water control structure as well as 2,200 linear feet of levee refurbishment. What that'll do is it'll allow marsh managers to more appropriately manage water levels to manage for that submerged aquatic vegetation that waterfowl and other species use and love. The southern track highlighted in blue is going to be located on the Harrybird Corporation property, and it'll feature about half of that terrace linear footage. This project's going to benefit about 3,700 acres at a cost of $7.25 million. Again, our partners on the project, I want to highlight and thank. It's going to be NACA, NIFWIF, Apache Minerals, the Harrybird Corporation, Dularge Marsh Hunting Club, Terrebonne Parish Consolidated Government, and the Terrebonne Levee and Conservation District. So a couple projects that we have lined up in queue. This is for our fiscal year 24 and beyond. That's estimated to total 34 million worth of projects. Again, just look at the diversity of private and public lands projects, as well as the different restoration techniques. The ones highlighted, I'm going to briefly tell you about. So the Karen Crow Bank Line repair, this is a project in Terrebonne Parish on ConocoPhillips property. This will be done through the ConocoPhillips DU partnership. This area, we've invested a lot of money in implementing water control structures and terraces to help manage that marsh that's been deteriorating throughout the years. You can see here some of these yellow pins are some of the water control structures that we've implemented. But the bank line here, this is the Karen Crow Bank Line coming down. This area has a very narrow salinity wedge, and so salinity from the southern marsh is encroaching into that freshwater marsh. And this can happen due to the passing of fronts as well as low water levels coming from the Atchafalaya River. So the features of this project will hopefully restore the 7 miles worth of bank line to an elevation of about 2.5 feet, and also repair 5 breaches through that bank line to help those water control structures be more efficient. This is on ConocoPhillips property, and it's estimated to conservatively conserve 5,000 acres, although some models have estimated that this project could benefit up to 10,000 acres of marsh. This project will cost about 1.2 million, and right now the partners are just DU and ConocoPhillips, although that probably will change. This was a project that we recently submitted to the NOAA Transformational Habitat and Coastal Resilience Grant. It's called the Louisiana Highway 1 Marsh Terracing and Living Shoreline Project. This is located in Lafourche Parish, just south of Golden Meadow, outside the Hurricane Protection Levee, which you can see there on the map. It's located between Old Highway 1 and the new Highway 1, which will be an elevated portion of highway that they recently just started construction on. The project features will be 88,000 linear feet of earthen terraces, with about 10,000 feet of those terraces featuring a living shoreline product. That living shoreline product is basically a 3D printed concrete structure that's bioengineered to have maximum benefits for oyster recruitment. And so once oysters establish on those modules, it'll grow and protect the terraces, as well as provide habitat for oysters. This is on property owned by Apache Minerals and a small portion on the southern end by ConocoPhillips. Conservatively, it'll benefit about 954 acres at a cost of $6.3 million. Again, our partners are ConocoPhillips, Apache Louisiana Minerals, Lafourche Parish Government, and NOAA. This project is not yet funded, but we do anticipate hearing back by the end of this year, and hopefully it will be funded. And so this project is probably of most interest to y'all. We've partnered with Audubon to do the Bay Coast and Belle Isle Lake Restoration Project. This is located in Vermilion Parish. Ducks Unlimited has partnered with Audubon to provide engineering and design services for this project, and as well as some permitting assistance. The project right now is still in the design phase, so it's in flux, but the current state of the project, I believe, is to feature 4 water control structures, as well as 3,000 linear feet of shoreline protection and 2,000 feet of terraces. Project's estimated cost $3.1 million and benefit 2,300 acres. This is located on property owned by the State Wildlife Refuge, as well as the Paul J. Rainey Sanctuary. Partners include Audubon, DU, LDWF, and the Rainey Conservation Alliance, which is comprised of EA McElhenney Enterprises, Audubon, Sagrera Lands, and the Vermilion Corporation. So some additional work that Ducks Unlimited is doing in South Louisiana includes the partnership we have with ConocoPhillips. That's always growing, and we're always staying busy with them. We also have the Ducks Unlimited Rice Stewardship Program, which I told you about earlier. We have Kyle Swallow, who's in our Lafayette's office, who works with rice producers to make sure that they can implement best management practices in their farming practices in exchange for financial incentives. What that does is it allows nutrients to be conserved in those rice fields, as well as keeping sediments in the rice fields, and that benefits waterfowl and many other species. We also have the Louisiana Waterfowl Project, which does all the same restoration techniques, just usually on a smaller scale on private lands. We have multiple projects going on right now through that. And most recently, we have the NRCS NERDA Nutrient Reduction Program, which Ducks Unlimited has partnered with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to do. What this is basically through funding by the BP oil spill. Ducks Unlimited has a project in Southeast Louisiana, just south of Thibodaux. We're working in 3 particular watersheds to work with sugarcane farmers, as well as cattle producers, to try to implement best management practices in their farming practices. We also have Kyle Swallow working in Southwest Louisiana doing the same thing through this program to work with rice producers. We've also partnered with a couple of universities to do research projects. We don't actually do them out of the Lafayette office, but we do provide assistance, transportation, and things like that to the grad students to help them get out to their field sites and collect data when they need it and where they need it. In particular, I know we work with Mississippi State University, as well as LSU and a few others. As much as we're able to get done, we do face some problems. Some of our concerns and obstacles, one being habitat loss, especially here in South Louisiana. As you saw, we have a coastal land loss crisis, both due to natural processes such as subsidence and erosion, as well as human-caused interactions. As you saw, hurricanes also pose a threat to our wetlands by degrading them, introducing salt water, and actually removing the wetlands. We face many invasive species here in Louisiana, such as apple snails, the roseau cane scale bug, and nutria, many to name. But we constantly face problems from invasive species. Development of wetlands is not so much as a problem here in South Louisiana as it is in other parts of the US, but it is still a factor. One of our biggest problems that we're facing right now is the economy. All of our projects, we typically bid out and design and engineer 2 years in advance. And when we write a grant, it sometimes takes a year to hear back from. So it's a 3-year process. And when the project is ready to move forward on the ground, it's been 3 years and inflation has gone up. We've had labor shortages, supply chain problems, fuel prices have increased. And so dealing with the effects of the economy for projects that we planned 3 years ago is something we're having to deal with. And that's not just Ducks Unlimited. We've talked to CPRA and other organizations, and they're facing the same obstacles that we are right now. It's not stopping us, it's just causing some speed bumps, and we're working through it. Overall, in the US, we're having declining hunter participation. As y'all know, hunters are a large funding source for what we do, as well as state wildlife agencies. There's fewer excise taxes on firearms, ammunition, and angling equipment, as well as fewer license sales. And one example would be our state agency here in Louisiana, LDWF. They receive no state general funds from the state budget. They're largely funded through their own sale of licenses and whatnot. So that's the problem we're facing with fewer participation, meaning fewer income coming in. But there are avenues to get around that. You can buy your duck stamp. And I know all of y'all hopefully in here probably have bought yours already for this year. Duck stamps don't benefit just waterfowl. They benefit many other species, as y'all are aware. So that's one of the easiest ways you can support funding to conservation programs. So that's all I have. I wanted to just give a 10,000-foot overview of Ducks Unlimited, what we're doing here in South Louisiana and what we are. I do want to leave time for questions, comments, and any open discussion if you'll have it. So thank you for having me. I'd be happy to go back to any slides.
Probably stop the share and see if people want you to go back to the slides and then share them
Okay.
so that people can see your face.
All right.
Does anybody have questions? I have.
Yes.
All the building all these structures, of the fall of these marsh areas for vegetation and being here. You finished local area?
Yes. So let me go back. I can get rid of this. I don't think I can. So you'll see the areas. Yeah, so for those of you online, the question was the area between the terraces that we dig out for the soils. Where does that come from? It comes from in between the terraces. So there's typically a borrow pit that's, I want to say 5 feet deep, maybe 10 feet to 20 feet wide on each side of the terrace. And that's where we get the soils to build these. So it comes basically from here to right there. It doesn't move far.
Yeah, so the area is dredged out, that's there's problems for vegetation growth, so 5 feet deep there.
We do, if it's too deep, you won't get submerged aquatic vegetation, but typically those borrow areas aren't a substantial part of the project area. But you can see in spots, sometimes on satellite imagery, you'll see the borrow area, and it's just a hole that's, too deep for vegetation to grow, but you'll see right next to it the vegetation and then the terrace. But if the terraces weren't there, there wouldn't be vegetation anyways, because the water is too turbid. There's sunlight doesn't get down to the bottom to allow that vegetation to grow. So when you have the terraces, it stops that wave action and the vegetation can grow in between them.
Most of the vegetation is below the water line, or at the water line.
It's called submerged aquatic vegetation because the majority of the plant's underwater, but it comes up to the surface. And some of it is emergent, but the majority of it is just right at the surface. Just like you see there in those pictures. You'll get on the marsh edge, you can see this is a terrace edge. Sometimes the terraces do accrete out into that area. It's not significant, but you can see like a little clump of grass right here. It's starting to accrete into the terrace field.
Maybe, so there's two things when I do my classes too. The statistics that I generally use are that One is that Louisiana at one time supported 40% of the nation's waterfowl in the winter time. And so has that number changed and by how much? And I mean, these projects obviously are part of the what is hoping to increase that number, but of course that's affected duck hunting and income from duck hunting and everything else. So
Right.
where are we with that right now?
I don't believe that statistic's changed, to my knowledge. I'm actually not a waterfowl biologist. I'm more of a coastal marsh manager by trade, but I don't believe that number has changed. It is a significant number though, like you said, 40%. And a large percentage of that is on rice, which many people don't attribute to. So the rice agriculture is very important for waterfowl here in Louisiana, particularly in the winter, when they're stopping over for they're on their migration. It's a huge energy source.
The other thing, the other statistic that I found at some point, because I encourage my students to buy their duck stamp because it is national migratory hunting and conservation.
Mhm.
And I found a chart from, I think it's 2015 or 2016 that lists all the national wildlife refuges in Louisiana and shows how much of those lands were purchased from duck
Oh, yeah.
stamps. It's about 30%.
That's staggering.
It's
I didn't know that.
enormous, but I can't find anything more recent than that.
Okay.
And so I wondered if you knew that or maybe.
I haven't come across anything like that. I'm glad that you told me though. I would be interested to know.
Yeah, and I don't know, since it's been a couple of years since I found the chart, I'm not sure where I found it. I mean, that's a huge number. I can't remember how many acres it was.
Right. And it makes sense because the refuges are for migratory birds, and you saw on the flyways they converge here in Louisiana. So
That buy your duck stamp is a real thing.
it is. Yes.
I found it interesting that Arkansas has such a large amount of rice production.
Yes. They
You don't realize
the largest rice producing state. So I believe it's, maybe I wrote it down. I believe it's Arkansas, California, Louisiana. Curious myself now. Well, yeah, Arkansas is definitely the largest for rice production.
I guess I've heard comments from floodwaters the last couple of 3 years, claiming that the number of ducks in Louisiana seems to be less for blaming it on Arkansas. So it's a large extent. That was, they were saying, people told me that they're blaming it on Arkansas feeding ducks.
Right.
They are, like growing rice.
Right. I mean, in truth, waterfowl are only going to migrate if they have to. So they only go as far south as they need to reach that energy source and those wintering grounds. But I don't think it's primarily rice agriculture. There's a whole host of issues that are changing migration patterns. We have climate change, which is allowing changes in agricultural practices up north in the Corn Belt. The Corn Belt's moving further north. We also have, changes in that particular agriculture sector is probably one of the biggest in addition to climate change. But as well as wetland losses. I mean, like you saw on the map, Louisiana's lost 1.3 million acres of the habitat that waterfowl would typically have used historically.
Is there any work, being done to anticipate the effects of, global warming and sea level rise as far as wetlands go?
Yes, Ducks Unlimited, I don't think we have any research, but there's a lot out there. Like you saw on the map here, the models are showing sea level rise and wetland loss coming to Louisiana. And so hopefully some of these projects can either slow that loss or sustain marshes enough to make them more resilient to those changes.
The only way to-
Lease their land so that people who go duck hunting, if they're duck hunting, right?
Yes, that's one of their sources of income. Farming is not as profitable as it is if in some areas. So particularly rice production, they will lease it to craw fishermen and as well as waterfowl hunters. So
Did you get upset? Ducks or even.
no, they're more worried probably about apple snails and other pests.
The price is done by.
Right. It's leftover grain that's fallen.
Yellow rails and rice, that's the second harvest, and that was November. So in the winter, that might
Right. And if they do have waterfowl hunting leases on them, they'll grow that ratoon crop and actually leave it for the hunters. So because the ratoon crop's not as robust as the first crop, and so they'll just leave it and let the ducks have it all.
That's why I thought it. Kind of, they get money. $5-7.
There's no federal dollars that I'm aware of that pay to plant that second crop. There are programs that pay to flood those fields during the winter months.
Yeah, that's what.
Yes.
Correct.
So we have winter water holding programs that will incentivize the farmer to either pump or hold the water, anticipation of migratory waterfowl using it when they come down. And it's a huge benefit to farmers because the waterfowl actually work on the soils and the nutrient cycling and break down that past year's crop so that the next year's crop, the field is ready when they drain it. They get all that rice stubble down.
people online.
Yes, I need to check in. They might have typed in some. So one question is, where does one buy duck stamp? So I actually got mine last week at Field and Stream in Lafayette, but you can go directly to a post office if you want the physical stamp that day. But you can go to Walmart, usually any major retailer that has an outdoors section, and buy a stamp on, and they'll give it to you printed out on a piece of paper, and then they will mail you later on the actual stamp. It's $25, but with credit card processing fees and whatnot, it comes out to $27.
ABA, the American Birding Association, also sells it online.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm kind of old fashioned. I like to go in person and buy it. So Jay, yes, you're correct. The flooded crawfish fields, they, like we just talked about, they play an important part in that wintering habitat for waterfowl. In conjunction with rice, crawfish rotation, flooded fields are incredibly important. Oh, really? All right, I think that's all we got. Are there any other questions? I'd be happy to stick around and talk too. All right, thank you all for having me.